While we sleep, the guardians of the night take to the streets, having said goodbye to those they love. Each other knowing they may never say these words again, they face the evil that we run from. They dedicate their lives to those that would hate them because they wear the badge. They wear the badge not for the glory or recognition, but for the passion to help others. This is the LEO First Podcast. We'll talk to the men and women in law enforcement, those that have retired, those that keep the prisons secure, and anyone who's impacted by law enforcement. We'll peel back the curtain, and you'll get the real stories. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Every law enforcement officer has a story to tell. Get ready to hear from the men and women who put their lives on the line every day for their communities and their country. Welcome to the LEO First Podcast. Now, here's your host, Michael Laidler.
Hey, everybody. It's Michael Laidler, your host of the LEO First Podcast. And this show is kind of cool because our guest and I both live in Texas. And if you live in Texas or anywhere around Texas, you know how freaking hot it is right now. I can tell you 100-degree days, it's almost common. 90-degree nights is a norm right now. If you have a chance to leave the state for a few days to kind of get that refreshing temperature somewhere else, please do. We highly recommend it. But my guest today is Ernie Stevens. He is a retired law enforcement officer that's written a book. He's been on a TV documentary, and heck, he's just about building us up and sharing his stories. Ernie, tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, Michael. And first of all, thank you. And you're absolutely right about the heat in Texas, man. Do not come here if you know what's good for you. So, Michael, thank you. Retired, like you said, law enforcement for 28 years. I served with the San Antonio Police Department for 27 of those years. Prior to that, I was an officer at a smaller municipality when I first started off, and retired in January of 2021. And right now, I'm currently the Deputy Division Director at the Council of State Governments at the Justice Center, where I oversee the portfolio for law enforcement. So if you're an agency that has applied for and gotten grants from the Department of Justice to build maybe, let's say, a co-response model of a clinician and a police officer to respond to crisis calls, most likely we're going to be your technical assistance advisor, and we're going to help you get through that grant, get you set up in the planning and the implementation phase. So as much as I wanted to be retired and stay retired, it just didn't work out that way. And I absolutely love working here at the national level.
Yeah, sometimes that's just how it works, Ernie. But it's cool that it's cool how you're able to leave law enforcement, but not leave it necessarily. And the nice side about what you're doing now is that you're still helping law enforcement. So it's not like you went and started to bag groceries, and there's nothing wrong with bagging groceries, but that doesn't really promote law enforcement as much. But it's kind of interesting. Were you thinking about that transition before or after you retired?
So when I retired, I really had no plan. I had just was in a HBO documentary called Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops that was getting a lot of exposure, doing really well. And when I retired, I did a little consulting and teaching, and was out in California, did some teaching for a while, over in Colorado, down in South Texas, doing mostly crisis intervention training. And it was a little difficult on the family. You know, I've got a teenage daughter and my wife being home, and anybody that knows about crisis intervention training knows that's a week-long class. And so to be gone for a week at a time was a little difficult. And as much as I enjoyed doing it, I didn't enjoy doing it at the same time, just because of the dynamics with the family. I really wanted to spend more time at home, especially just coming off of retirement. And I was speaking in Washington, D.C. They were screening the film out there at the Correctional Leaders Association. And lo and behold, there was a director from the Council of State Governments on a speaking panel with me. And afterwards, you know, she approached me and asked me, you know, have you ever thought, or do you know anybody? First of all, this is what an airhead I am, Michael. She goes, do you know anybody that might be interested in a deputy division director for law enforcement at the Council of State Governments? And to be honest with you, I was like, I don't even know what that is. Like, and no, I don't know anybody. You know, I'm thinking a chief or, you know, somebody at that level. And when I received a message a few days later saying, "Hey, did you think about it, consider it?" I'm like, "Yeah, I thought about it, but I don't know. I really don't know anybody." She's like, "Well, what about you?" And I'm like, "Well, you're gonna have to tell me a little bit more about this." So it was one of those things where I really wasn't looking. I was just out there speaking my heart at one of these screenings for the film, and everything just fell into place perfectly.
That's crazy to hear, Ernie. Like, first, we're going to break this down several different layers, but the fact that, and this is one of the things that I've had a hard time with, and I'm not at retirement age or retirement tenure, but I know a lot of people are, and I have friends and, people that have retired. How does it feel like the day you step out of your agency and you really don't know what you're going to do next? Like, what is that feeling like?
Well, for me, it was time to go. I mean, most officers, they know, right, when it's time. Either they've got something else planned, they've reached that perfect age of retirement where they're going to get their pension and just kind of go a different direction. And for me, it was, I really had thought I was going to do 2 or 3 more years and hit that 30-year mark.
Mm-hmm.
But just the way things were starting to go at the time at the agency, at the department, the vision and the mission of the mental health unit that I was assigned to was starting to change a little bit. And it really wasn't, to me, just speaking for me, it really started to lose that connection with the community and became more of a reactive instead of proactive unit where we were out there all the time, really engaging with the community. And when I saw as the unit began to expand, the vision and the mission changed, and it just didn't really align with the unit that I helped start in 2008, which really was the root, was being involved with the National Alliance on Mental Illness here in San Antonio, really being involved with the community and the stakeholders, and really partnering with the community. And it just seemed like it was starting to, you could see the writing was on the wall. They were leaning a little bit more towards, we're going to start looking more at threat assessment and looking at mental health things, going, in that direction.
Correct.
And I was like, I think it's time for me to go. There's some other things out there I'd like to do. And like I said, everything just lined up perfectly after that.
So that's interesting. As the unit expanded, it seemed like it started to lose its mission, or I guess the purpose of when it was originally created. Now, how big is San Antonio PD? How many officers, or how many staff in general?
So they have about 3,000 staff, about 1,400 sworn.
So do you think there's a magic number or percentage for a unit like that? Because a lot of agencies are actually building their units right now, but it's like, is it too big, too small? And I can tell you, I've never even looked into it, but just given your feeling based on what you did down there with the PD, was there a certain number that you thought where it was like, okay, if we had a 50-man unit out of the 1,400 officers, that's the magic number? Or like, what, I mean, obviously, what did you feel would have been a good number or percentage like for you guys?
Well, for us, I think the structure of the way the unit was being worked. For example, we were all centralized downtown at our headquarters, but two of us, including myself, were on loan to a special assignment to where we would actually go out and engage the top 100 highest utilizers of mental health services. And we had 2 paramedics and 5 clinicians, a doctor, and office space at our local mental health authority to kind of work that special assignment. So I was assigned to that, which I enjoyed. But then we also had 2 officers, 2 detectives, 2 clinicians assigned to the threat assessment team. We had another officer doing nothing but wellness. We had another officer that did all the curriculum and the training. So, we were spread out doing so many different things that the focus of really responding to the 911 calls that were coming in that had a mental health related component, it just wasn't feasible or possible anymore. So I think a good structure would have been, yes, you have to expand, but because we had 6 different substations throughout San Antonio, maybe start putting 2 officers, make that, a unit at each substation, at least cover the entire city and have some kind of coverage for a mental health response. And then as you grow, of course, you've got to have those that are responsible for your officer wellness and resiliency program, as well as, your continued education and these specialized assignments. So when I left, we had 10 officers. Now they have 20. So they did double in size. It's just the structure's the same.
Yeah, I know it's tough. And I know I didn't mention it when we were speaking before the show, but I actually spent some time in the San Antonio area. I was a Border Patrol agent down in Laredo for a little over 4 years. And I can tell you the size of San Antonio is big. And if it was only a 10-person unit while you were there covering that city, like just all, and then not on top of that, you're not just covering areas, you're covering different programs. I could definitely see how it could just be a stretch to you.
Yeah, and when we started in 2008, it was just two officers. It was me and one other officer. I got to pick a partner. And, back then I was all excited about it. And we didn't even know how we were going to do this unit. The chief said, hey, you get 6 months to figure this out. Don't screw it up. And so we had to figure it out. We had to write our own policies and procedures and get everything, signed off on by the chief's office on what that mental health unit was going to look like and what a response was going to look like, and what happens when we have an officer that's in a crisis. So, and then before you know it, we got 4 officers and 6 officers. And then it became so heavy on training because, as you know, in the state of Texas, TCOL, our licensing agency for the state, started to mandate CIT training. And because of the Sandra Bland incident, the Sandra Bland Act for de-escalation training. So there was such a heavy emphasis on training. It really took all of us to try to get the entire department trained. And when that happened, everything had to go on hold. All the mental health calls had to be handled by patrol, the follow-ups. We just had no time to get to it.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that's, I think the intentions are always great with a lot of the different units, and then things just happen. While, like you said, things evolve, like you said, the Sandra Bland Act or another, like just the structure T code, just all the different additions that come up. Because when you first create it, it's kind of like with you and one other officer, it's one thing because you're like, okay, this is a new program. We can kind of do what we need to do. We can focus on what it's designed to do, at least from the ground level. And then as it starts to build the different pillars and the different levels, it's like, hey, what about this? What about that? And I'm sure you guys were very efficient. So that made your command staff, your executive staff look like, hey, what else can they do?
Yeah, you're right. We were efficient. In fact, when the unit first started, and we expanded to 4 officers, I picked up a new partner named Joe. And it was around that time where we started to get a little local media exposure. It's like, hey, San Antonio Police Department has a mental health unit. What does that look like? And to paint a picture for your listeners, we were plain clothes, blue jeans and a t-shirt. We drove an unmarked car. We kept our badge on a chain underneath our shirt. Everything was concealed. Our weapon, everything was concealed. And we would go out and either relieve patrol on a scene that had a mental health component to it and get them back in service, or actually pick those calls up coming in through 911 to where patrol never even had to respond. And as the media began to report out on it, we had a writer by the name of Ann Snyder come down from the Atlantic, and she wrote a piece called Policing with Velvet Gloves, which I thought was a pretty catchy title. And she was showing a different and alternative approach to how law enforcement was starting to handle mental health calls. And what we were doing, I believe at the time, was fairly unique. I know other agencies did it, but usually not in plain clothes, usually not in an unmarked car. And that led to a Nightline story that happened. In fact, they put that story out 3 times, I believe, in 2016, because of all the law enforcement involved shootings involving mentally ill individuals, whether they were armed or unarmed. It brought a real spotlight to it. So we had Nightline come out and ride with us, and they ran that story 3 times nationally. And that's when the filmmaker of actually Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops, which is, you can stream it on HBO Max right now. That's when this director called us and said, hey, I'm a filmmaker and I'd like to come out and do a ride along. So you're right. What you start out doing and your mission is one thing, but then what happens throughout society can change that, right? We had 3 officers commit suicide during the filming. So we really started to put an emphasis on wellness and resiliency training. Just last year, San Antonio had 8 officers complete suicide. So now they've got an entire wellness unit. So, it really is incumbent or dependent upon what's going on at the time.
Yeah, that's just crazy how things have just transitioned. And it's like like you guys started with an amazing idea in 2008. And it's almost like it was almost like a precursor to what was going to happen, just in our law enforcement industry, and with all the now emphasis on mental wellness and officer wellness, whatever term people like to use, but essentially making sure people are handling themselves mentally versus just blowing it off. When I look at some of the, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, and in the beginning, Michael, it was one thing to try to figure out what the unit was going to look like and how it was going to be structured. But just going through a 40-hour CIT class did not make us experts by any means. So I do want to give credit to our local mental health authority, whose clinicians and doctors immediately partnered with us. And those clinicians rode with us, and learning from them, learning what role law enforcement really needs to play in some of these calls. Really, in some cases, it's just to shut up and get out of the way, to be honest with you, and let the clinician kind of do their thing. And we learned so much with this collaboration. So I did want to stress that without the collaboration of our partners in San Antonio, we would not have been a successful unit, and there probably been no HBO documentary.
It's interesting, and I started to hear about this concept a couple of years ago, and I've been kind of on the fence about it. But you guys did it in reality, and that was when you guys went plain clothes, essentially removing all the obvious signs that you're law enforcement to take some of these mental health calls. Is what I've been hearing last couple of years about maybe having social workers or non-law enforcement be partners with law enforcement, or them just be assigned to that. How did you see, at least in your time particularly, obviously I don't want you to say what could have happened in Arizona or Miami or whatever, but in your time in doing San Antonio PD, doing this unit, like, did you see a change in how some of those calls were handled just based on you guys going plain clothes?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for years, I responded to mental health calls in uniform, and that's always just a huge barrier because I can say this probably pretty confidently that if you're an adult living with mental illness and you've had an encounter with the police, it's probably been negative. And I'm just going to be honest and say it. So removing that barrier of just the uniform in and of itself, and then being educated really to what mental illness and mental health is, because I was completely ignorant. My education came from television and Hollywood, which couldn't have been more incorrect of what mental health and mental illness is. So really learning from the doctors, the clinicians, it was an eye-opening experience. It was a career change for me. What your listeners may or may not know is I was actually assigned to a tactical unit when I went through the training, and it had such a profound effect on me that I knew right then and there, as soon as I was done with that training, this is what I want to do. I want to take this curriculum that Houston Police Department gave us. I want to tweak it. I want to make it ours. I want to teach this, and I want to start a unit. And, this was back in 2003 when we first got the training. And in 2003, going chasing mental health calls is not sexy in law enforcement. Probably isn't.
It isn't. It isn't. No, you're right. It's not. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I knew right then, as soon as I was done with that week of training, I said, I've got to do something, because I had an encounter during that week with a person from the community that came in and shared a personal story. And there is power in story. And her story was so compelling. And I got drawn into it. And I was like, man, this woman needs help. And she's scared to call law enforcement. And I don't want her to be scared. And we've got to do something to change that outlook. And it just became like I don't know, just a calling, a mission. I wanted things to change in San Antonio. I knew I couldn't do it by myself, but I was going to keep raising hell until somebody listened and gave us a chance.
And it's cool because you're not the only person I've talked to that has went from essentially a tactical unit, where usually we see they're just about busting in doors and slamming bad guys, to actually taking the mental side, the mental approach to building up not just yourself, but building the community, building your fellow officers, because it is a different approach from what we're traditionally taught. And like you said, 2003, it was definitely not sexy going to mental health calls, especially not volunteering for them. I mean, my time as a police officer was from 05 to 09. back in Tallahassee. And even then, every time it was like, oh man, here we go. What's going to happen? And you're right. Responding in uniform, no matter how smooth of a talker you could be, how good your verbal judo was, just that uniform was a barrier.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see it. It's amazing. You'll see it firsthand in the HBO documentary. Not to give away, a whole lot of what happened in there, but me and Joe were working overtime, and we were in uniform filling in for patrol because we had so many openings for district fill that you could have picked up a shift 7 days a week if you wanted to, just to work overtime. And one of those calls that was captured on film that was put in the documentary was for an individual, a female that wanted to jump off a bridge. And of course, we showed up and arrived in uniform. And she was very standoffish, got a lot of FUs, get away from me. I don't trust you. But she didn't trust the uniform. She didn't know me. She didn't know Joe, but she knew law enforcement and the history that she has had with her own crises and just engagements with law enforcement was not pleasant. So we knew right away, look, she's upset at the uniform and the cars, and we just got to take our time and be patient and be empathetic to what she's going through.
Yeah, it's just a different way to approach it. Not a wrong way, not the only right way, just another way. And I do believe that us shifting more to, at minimum, and it's, I say at minimum, at least the training that comes around like crisis intervention and mental wellness for the community and ourselves. I think that's a lot where it goes. And I could tell you just in the last 18 months, the push on mental wellness, officer wellness, just in our industry is really moving in the right direction, because back when you were doing your stuff in 2003, there wasn't much of a push, at least nationally. Now, certain departments that were fairly proactive, I think a little bit bigger like yours, they definitely had the vision, but other ones were just trying to survive. They're like, hey, that's not even on our radar. But nowadays it's everywhere. So when it comes to the HBO documentary, like, we've been teasing the audience enough with it. Like, how did that process go? Like, and how has it been being able to do a documentary involving law enforcement?
Well, first of all, it was a blessing. Like I alluded, we got the call from Jen McShane, who is the director, and she said, "Hey, I read your article, Policing with Velvet Gloves, and I saw the piece on Nightline, and I would like to come down and do a ride along." So I'm thinking, okay, come on down. And I'm expecting a film crew, a sound crew. Well, she shows up by herself, and she pulls out her iPhone, and she's going to follow us in her car. And I'm like, what in the world is going on? Like, what is this? This
not
is
what
joke,
you pictured.
right?
Yeah, not what you pictured.
No, not at all. But there was a method to her madness, because she's actually a genius. And had I done some research, I would have known that she is a very talented filmmaker who's won multiple awards. In fact, her last documentary was voiced over by Liam Neeson. So yeah, I did not do my homework on this one.
Yeah, she has some famous people. Yes.
Yeah. So she hops, she's got her little car and she's following us from call to call. And, I come to find out the reason she's doing that, she doesn't want to be intrusive. She doesn't want me and Joe being any different. She doesn't want to really have her presence felt on any of these calls. But it was the first call we went to. It was for a gentleman that was hearing voices, command hallucinations, telling him to kill the individual that was in charge of the group home. So we get there and he's outside, he's smoking, and we're talking with him. He had just had a change in medication, and he said, yeah, there's knives on the property. That's what I want to do. And so we're saying, okay, well, I tell you what, of course, that this, about your illness, that hallucinations are part of your illness. And, because you've had a change recently in your medication, something may be off. And, now that you've made this outcry of being homicidal, we've got to get you go and get you looked at. So let's get you screened. You'll stay with us and we'll give you a ride. So as he starts walking towards the car, even though it's unmarked, the hubcaps give it away, right? Everybody knows what those stupid little hubcaps look like. But it's just a black Ford Explorer or whatever it was, right? And he goes, well, I'm not going to ride in the back of a police car. And I said, okay, well, do you want to just ride up front? He said, yeah, I'll ride up front. So, I pat him down real quick for weapons. And we did have a barrier in that vehicle. So that was going to put me behind the cage in the back seat.
Correct.
And then, him and Joe were going to ride up front. So the director comes and starts grabbing me by the arm. She goes, is he going to ride up front? I'm like, yeah. She goes, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't understand. What's the question? Like, what are you confused about? I go, we're going to give him a ride to a treatment facility, and I'm going to walk in and introduce him to the staff and brief them about what's going on. And he's going to start his treatment. She goes, well, what if he attacks Joe? I'm like, well, that's Joe's problem, right? I mean, I'm in the back. I'm good. I got a cage. Why are we so stigmatized with people that have mental illness? He's not like, if he goes to attack Joe, I'm sure Joe's going to put the brakes on and then we'll get out and have to deal with it. Right. Well, whatever.
Yeah.
We've never been in this situation. Of course, there were times we would get criticized for our tactics, wow, you sit down with people or this or that, but these are tactical compromises, right? You understand what I'm saying? So she was like, well, this would never happen in New York. NYPD would just have put handcuffs on him. And I'm like, well, I mean, he's not under arrest. He's basically a patient at this time, and we're going to take him to get screened. So she was like, well, I think I'm going to come back and do a story here. So she wasn't kidding. In 2016, she began coming back for 3 years. She brought a film crew. Yeah. She used a local film crew based out of Austin. She was flying down from New York for a few weeks at a time, but they would come down from Austin and they would film, and they filmed for 3 years. And the film debuted in 2019 at South by Southwest there in Austin. And I had never been to a film festival. Like, I had no idea how big these things are, especially South by Southwest, right? Where they do music and art and everything else, right? It's like thousands and thousands of people all crammed into this downtown area to just enjoy all the arts and the festival. So she was telling us, hey, they're going to screen this film 3 times throughout the week. Do you think y'all can come to the 3 screenings? I'm like, oh, sure. We'll make it happen. So the very first night it debuts, I drive up and I'm looking for like a little warehouse or something. And the address takes me right to a Draft House movie theater. I'm like, holy cow, man, this is like at a movie theater.
This is different.
Like, people are actually going to, so we're walking in. Nobody knows who me and Joe are. And I'm seeing people in line getting popcorn and sodas. I'm like, holy crap. Like, what if they walk out? Like, I'm nervous, man. Like, so we go in and we just sit down, like in the middle of the theater. Well, the whole thing is sold out. Like, there were people standing up in the back. And what's very interesting is at the very beginning of the film, nobody knows who we are, right? The film it runs 96 minutes. And then afterwards, they say, hey, by the way, we've got a couple of surprise guests for you sitting in the audience. We'd like to bring them up on stage for some questions, right? So I stand up and the girl next to me is like, oh my God, Mom, look, it's one of their, it's like, oh my God, like, are you serious, freaking out about this? And we go up stage, and what's funny, Michael, is that these people who didn't know you were complete strangers at the beginning of this film. Mm-hmm. By the end of it, there was such a connection. They wanted to share their most intimate details of their lives with you. We heard things like, well, if you would have responded to my house, my son would be alive today. My daughter wouldn't have hung herself. My husband wouldn't have shot himself. We kept hearing this all year long at every festival we went to. So it was, it was extremely powerful experience to go through that.
Yeah. And it's the things like that where I think we need to emphasize when it comes to law enforcement, because we just never know how much of a better impact we can make on the community. And I think when people hear things, like when I hear stuff, I'm going to tell you, I'll be straightforward, Ernie. I never heard about this film or the documentary before me and you connected. But as I listen to it and I think about how we humanize our industry and we either retain or try to bring that positive light to what we do, these are the kind of things that need to be making national headlines, like documentaries like yours, because it shows the other side. It shows that, hey, we're just not those SWAT uniform guys that are just breaking in doors. Like, well, no, we're out here really trying to help people out. And you can be in this industry and you can grow, you can have a good time, but it doesn't always have to be that head busting mentality that people think. And obviously, like you said, everybody has a different experience with law enforcement. But I think that too many times we're not highlighting films like yours? Like what have you seen? Like outside of just what you guys have done, what other films or documentaries that come anywhere closer to what you guys did are out there?
Yeah, there's just not. And that's, that was part of my fear was, you know, we're two white cops from Texas going to mental health calls. Who's going to watch this? Like, where's, I don't, and I didn't understand that power of connection that the filmmaker saw. Like, she knew. And during the filming, like I had mentioned earlier, we had 3 officer suicides. So now the film took a different twist.
I'm
It
sorry to hear
became,
that. I'm sorry
yeah,
to hear that.
thank you.
I
Yeah,
am
thank
gonna. I
you.
don't like interrupting people, but hey, you said that earlier, and I cringed in my seat, and then you said it again. I cringed even more. I'm like, this. Sorry. Go ahead. My bad. I'm just
Yeah,
sorry. To hear
no,
that.
thank you. I appreciate it. But
Gosh.
the film began to take a twist, and now was instead of was just, at first I thought it was going to feel like a ride along. Oh, they're doing a ride along, going to calls with mental health, but then it became the camera took an inside turn to the officer, and now you got to see what goes on behind the badge, because in the documentary it shows, like Joe is going through a divorce. He's struggling with PTSD from the Marine Corps, and he's in treatment with the VA.
Mm.
It shows me going to school all night and working extra jobs every single night. It just shows you that police officers are no different than everyday people. We have the same everyday problems that everybody else does. And it's compounded by psychological trauma, the day in and day out, seeing the grind, seeing the just the tragedies that go on in this world, and then not processing it and bringing that home and having to carry that and then go back to work the next night and do it all over again. So it really people got to see behind the badge in this documentary to say, wow, we started getting questions instead of, people would ask anything and everything about the film, but then we started getting questions of, what do you do to take care of you? What is your methods of self-care? And it was like, wow, listen to some of these questions, like they're asking about us instead of, hey, do you still keep up with the girl on the bridge? Or what was the film festival circuit like? Or, hey, y'all won an Emmy, congratulations, what was that experience like? I love answering all those questions. But when somebody says, hey, how are you doing today? Or what was it like for you? And what did you do to cope day in and day out with what we saw in the documentary? That's powerful. That's how I know that now the community, who there seems to be this growing gap with law enforcement over the last few years, that's how we start to close it, to say, hey, we're not, if you take a look at it, we're not really all that different from the community. It's just we put a uniform on every day and go to work. Other than that, we take it off and become dads and moms and neighbors and brothers and sisters. I mean, no different, same problems, just compounded with a lot of stress.
And it's crazy that um that it's taken all that. And when I think about how it shifted to those kind of questions, I just think about, I actually asked one of my peers a similar question earlier this past week, and I was like, how's everything going with you? And he was like, he started laughing. He's like, what are you talking about, man? He was like, did you hear something? I was like, no, like, like you've been traveling for like the last 2 or 3 weeks. Like, I just want to know how you handling all this. Cause and Ernie, you've sat in this seat before. When you travel a lot, it's nothing like being at home. Because
No.
hotels are fun for like a night or two, but all of us that speak or travel or teach, like even you, when you talk about going a week long to these CIT trainings without your family, it was just funny because I asked him, I said, dude, no, I'm trying to figure out, how are you doing? Like, how are you taking care of yourself? Like, because I know this is rough. I mean, he's a single guy, no kids, but I was like, regardless, this is tough, man. Like sleeping in hotels, no matter if they're 1 star or 5 star, eating out all the time and not being just in the comfort of your home is stressful.
Yeah, it is. In fact, I can remember before I retired, a lot of officers, and this probably sounds familiar with you, you'd be looking at your phone saying, oh, this is the RV I'm going to buy. This is the boat I'm going to get, or this is the, right. Everybody,
Whatever, yeah.
you have those dreams, right? So when I retired, I was like, you know what? I'm going to buy an RV. I've never camped in my life. I don't know anything about it. In fact, every YouTube video I watch says don't do it. And I said, but I'm gonna do it. And
I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna try it.
why not, man? So me and my wife, we go and we buy one of these little ones that you drive around. And I remember it was as clear as day. It was our first night doing this thing, and I was looking up at the stars. It was just dark and peaceful and quiet. And my wife looked at me and she goes, "Wow, that's the first time I've seen that." I go, "What?" She goes, "You took a deep breath." And man, brother, that caught me off guard because I haven't taken a deep breath in I don't know how many years. And if you're in law enforcement, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've got to learn to breathe. You've got to learn to breathe. And I didn't do a real good job of self-care. I did a good job taking care of the community. That's where I put my priority, but you always put myself last. And in doing so, that's not a good place to be, because then your family suffers, you suffer, and in turn, the community can suffer as well. So, I had to reprioritize self-care and really make that up at the top of my list.
And it's funny, it's so amazing you say that, because in my signature presentation and my book, Greatness Beyond the Badge, those are two areas I always highlight. First, the concept of dissonance, where you manage work-life balance, where you're putting your self-care first. And the only reason I say that is because if you don't take care of yourself, how can you take care of your family? How can you take care of the community? How can you take care of your organization? Then I also talk about the practice of mindfulness, just taking that deep breath every day, at least for whatever amount of time you can do it, just to slow everything down, because what we do in law enforcement is so fast. Like there's really no stop, even in the slowest departments, because your adrenaline's like, as soon as you put your uniform on, and whether you go 10-8 or available from your house, or you go pick up a car and start there, as soon as you put your uniform on, you're at high alert. It's just part of the business. So you have that extra level of stress for what, 10 to 12 hours, let's say 8, depends on what your agency's at. So the fact that you were able to experience that moment, your wife's like, "Hey, Ernie, man, that was pretty good. I like seeing you take a deep breath." It was I bet it was just so amazing.
It was, and I can remember now, and it wasn't all that long ago, where she actually finished eating before me for a change. I mean,
let's talk about
for
that.
a minute.
Let's talk about that. Like, I tell people, what does that mean? Because a lot of people, especially if you're non-law enforcement, tell people what that means. The fact about the speed of the way you eat.
For years and years, you never know when you're going to get your next call. You might be able to get a sip of coffee. You might be able to get 4 or 5 cups of coffee, but you don't take it for granted. So when you sit down to eat and that food hits the table, it's got to go down as fast as possible. You don't have a choice, because, in Texas, it's a lot of Mexican food, and you're not taking your enchilada to go in the car. It's just not going to happen, right?
No, they don't go down like that.
No. So, and you talked about mindfulness, and I started thinking about that as I was eating. I wanted to know, I wanted to taste the texture of the food. I wanted to think about it. How was it grown? How long did it take? Truly trying to enjoy my food in every bite. And when I started doing that, I told my wife, "Man, wow, you ate kind of quick." She goes, "No, it's like 45 minutes. What are you doing? Like, you're usually done the dishes by now." It's like,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's you have to retrain yourself almost. It's difficult to explain if you have not experienced it, but for so many years, it was just a blessing to be able to eat without either being interrupted or having to run out. Or who knows what kind of food you're going to get served at 3 a.m. when your buddy the night before arrested to cook or something. You just don't know. So you either bring your own food or you roll the dice.
Yeah, that's true. You're right. You're right about the arresting the wrong person when it comes to food. Sometimes you're like, "Oh, I just arrested that person at my favorite restaurant." I was like, "Well, guys, we're not going here for 6 months. I hope you know this."
Why did you do that? Why did you write him a ticket, man? What's wrong with you? This is the only place we got to go.
you're like, "Oh, I can't go to this Danny's restaurant, or I can't go to whatever restaurant you like going to," just because of that. You're like, "Oh man." But it's I know you, no matter what, you're gonna have, if they committed a crime, you will arrest them. But those are some of the things you deal with on the back end.
Oh yeah, your everyday family is not going to be concerned about that when they go in and sit down at a restaurant, right? But it's funny. It's just, and it's little things. It's is your, like you said, when you put the uniform on, it's just something happens. I can already, just talking about it, I can already feel myself get amped up, remembering what that was like. And it was the moment you got ready to walk out the door. It's like, okay, I now have to become this person for a little while. And maybe I don't like being that person all the time, but it's who I have to be. And it's difficult. And, you do it for long enough and it takes its toll. So I'm glad that you use this platform to talk about, self-care and mindfulness. I think it's extremely important.
You got to. And I mean, Ernie, I'll be straightforward. When I came back into the speaking world, because I took a few years off, like I mentioned earlier, and if anybody follows my story, I didn't take it off because anything bad happened. I just got really busy and I had to refocus my time and energy. But when I came back into the speaking circuit about 2 years ago, 18 months ago, a lot of people were focused on leadership development and other things of that nature. And it wasn't really until, what are we in, August, when we're recording this episode? It wasn't really until maybe November, December of last year to where people really started to say, hey, Michael, we wanted you to come talk about your self-awareness presentation. We want you to focus more on the mindfulness. We want you to talk about work-life balance. And to me, that was exciting because it's like, hey, I've learned a long time ago that leadership is great to learn about, team building, servant leadership. But at what point do we start to lead ourselves? Because you can have all these amazing concepts, which I do still teach all of them. But I love the fact that we started to dial it all back. And now we're starting to look at the person and say, okay, what does this person need to succeed? What do they need to thrive? Versus just saying, well, you need to, as a leader, you need to worry about everybody else. But that leader, if they don't even know how to take care of themselves, how can they take care of the troops?
I love that. And, at the national level, the Department of Justice has taken notice because at the Justice Center where I'm at this year, we're going to be holding a 3-part community of practice, which is basically a webinar talking about officer wellness. And this was not on last year's radar. It was more about scene safety. What does a rural response look like? Front end diversion programs, reentry programs. But this year I saw it. I saw when the applications and the solicitations came out, it said, oh, wow, a 3-part series on officer wellness. So you're seeing it now at the national level because there's a huge epidemic of suicide within law enforcement. It is the number one killer of law enforcement. And number two, the retention of law enforcement has become just so difficult with everything that's gone on in the last few years that agencies and departments need to start recruiting from rookie to retirement. If you look at these pamphlets, when you open up go to LAPD, NYPD, go to whoever you want to go to, you open up the recruiting pamphlet, you're probably going to see a SWAT team member, somebody holding a K9, a bike patrol unit, a helicopter.
Yeah, that's right. That's true.
But where's the officer with their arm around another officer saying, it's okay, we're going to get through this together? Because that's the reality of this job. Those are the calls that you're going to go to day in and day out. Those other specialty units, if you land in them, good for you. Go have fun and get the experience and do other things. But at the end of the day, this job comes down to trauma. And what are you doing to check that trauma? So I love that we're seeing this at the national level and that you're discussing it. I've seen it in other agencies and through some good leaders that are out there. Just Neil Gang out there in Pinole, California with the ASHA model, I think is one of the better leaders out there that has really invested into his agency and department and built a 7-pillar approach to a culture of wellness for his law enforcement agencies. And there's others out there that have done it. But I think right now we're starting to see that as a priority for recruiting finally, which is long overdue.
And it's funny because when we talk about recruiting, retention, I love the concept of incentives. I don't like the implementation of them because I think that if we haven't yet, and I've not done any research, but just in my brain, we're going to create a culture where people are just jumping to different incentives. Because if I can work 1 year with you in San Antonio PD and make 10 to 15 grand, then I can go to Laredo PD, make another 15 grand. Then I come to Houston, make another 15 grand. I mean, I can make an additional 45 to 50 grand in a 3 to 4 year period. What's going to actually keep me there? And I know, I can't even say I think, now statistics will support me on this. Agencies that have developmental programs that are not just your basic standards like self-defense, firearms, driving, agencies that actually have those other developmental programs built in is what's going to keep people there, because people like to know that they're getting trained on something else besides direct police work. So things like I don't know a lot about the Asher model, but it sounds like he's doing investing into his staff over there. So when I hear that, I'm like, that's what's going to keep people to stay. That's what's going to keep that retention high. Because if not, you're going to, one, get people just jumping from every agency, or two, they're not going to be satisfied. And it is our responsibility as leaders, as we're looking at how to retain officers, to actually provide them with some kind of developmental plan to help them grow as people.
Well, and you nailed it, right? Because I like it. I like what you just said. I mean, that holds so much value, because if you will tell an officer at recruitment, at the stage of recruitment, like, we want to invest in you because we find value in you, that you add benefit to this agency and this community, right? And I think what law enforcement really needs to do, and some have done it, is redefine what safety is, right? For the longest time, safety was seen as like the absence of crime. But safety isn't the absence of crime. It's the presence of well-being. And that's well-being not only of your agency, but of the community you serve. So there's such a bigger picture when you're investing into a young officer, saying, hey, we want you both physically and mentally as sharp as you can be each and every day. And we're going to invest in you. And this is how. We're going to make this a place where it's okay not to be okay. And you don't need to be afraid to say something. We just want you to know it's not okay to stay that way. We're going to help you get through it. And this is how we're going to do it. These are the programs we're going to have in place. And these are the incentives. The incentives will be, you get to work out for an hour on duty, or we're going to have, if you work overnights, we're going to order, nutritional food to be in the refrigerator for you on a weekly basis. And, things like that. There's things you can do, right? You can add spirituality, your chaplains, your therapy dogs. There's so much you can do for an agency to say, hey, we want to build a culture of wellness to support you, but not only you, your families. Where have your families been involved in this recruiting process? Have they come out to your agency? Have they walked through? Have they sat through a roll call? Have they come to a monthly luncheon with other family members? Like, they've got to be involved with the agency to let them know that, hey, we're not only invested in the officer, but in the entire officer's family as well.
And I'm with you. That's one of the reasons why I started talking about it. People, they kind of look at me still a little like, like we're not sure. And it's usually the smaller agencies, and the smaller agencies want it as well, but like, given where you sit at, you can see some of the funding that they don't have. And it kind of, it's kind of rough, because I want to say one of the studies I looked at about maybe 3 months ago, maybe this was in May or June of 2023, was the smaller you go in agency size, the higher the suicide rates are. And I want to say that same statistic contributed to just people not having programs in place to help build their staff up.
Yeah, and that's where technology really comes in, right? If you look some of the apps that are available on cell phones nowadays, and I'm not going to endorse one over the other, but you can look at Lexapro, you can look at
so big companies.
Yeah, look at Mindbase. I mean, that's a proactive app, right? So they work with the CAD. So they already know what calls you've been dispatched to, and you start getting push notifications. Hey, you responded to a domestic violence and a suicide this week. If you have difficulty sleeping, here's some tips. They've got things that you can click on of interest. Like, man, I'm struggling financially. What is this button on financial wellness? What is this button on mindfulness? What is it? And then the agency actually gets a percentage printout saying, hey, 12% of your officers clicked on this, and 30% clicked on financial wellness. So we know at in-service training, at yearly in-service training, we're going to bring in a financial advisor to speak for 2 hours, because 30% of the department clicked on that button. So that's a way to be proactive. That's how you get ahead of, the stresses that these officers are going to run into, is you've got to make things available to them. So even if you're a smaller agency, at least having some kind of technology attached to a wellness program, I think, is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and obviously everybody has their different views. And I think some of the views come from, specifically on the apps, is one, if that's all the agency has in place and they do nothing else. And then two, sometimes you hear a small number like 30%. You're like, well, it's only 30%. But it's like, well, 30% is better than 0% not knowing it all.
No, I agree. And, and thank goodness for all the different hotlines out there. I had an officer contact me on social media a few weeks back that was going through a really difficult time and was just looking for a resource. So I threw some resources out there. I said, hey, just do me a favor. Do you mind checking back in with me and let me know how that resource was? And so he ended up calling Copline, and he came back and said, hey, that was fantastic. It was great to have a third party person, non-judgmental, listen to what I was going through. It was extremely helpful. So there are some good resources out there available. Is the hardest part is telling the officer it's okay to use them. It's okay. Like, we want you to use them. You're not going to get in trouble. And that's saying that the agency and leadership is truly bought into a wellness program.
And as it's funny you say that, because that's one of the things I kind of pitch when I try to speak at some of these agencies and stuff like that, because they tell me about their programs. I'm like, well, how are you pitching it? Because you're right, it's nice to have all these different things, but if the officers don't know it's okay, then they're not going to do it. I'd say, hey, what you have to do is you bring in, and this is just my concept, maybe it's me being a businessman, I don't know, but I say you bring in a third party that has no skin in the game for the app or the management. It's like, hey, we just want you to grow because this is what we study and we learn. I think that's one of the ways out of some of the other ways to help officers kind of buy into all these amazing softwares and all this just the technology we have in place.
Well, and for leaderships to walk the walk and talk the talk, I was up in Maine, in Portland, about a month and a half ago, and a chief up there of the Elliott Police Department. His name, believe it or not, is Elliott Moya. I'm like, hold on, Elliott from Elliott? Yeah. So I was up there speaking at a wellness conference, and he shared his story. He's the chief, and he said, if I'm gonna talk the talk, I want to walk the walk. So I made an appointment with a therapist, and I went and I talked to a therapist several times, and then I came back and I shared that experience with my agency. And I said, you know what? I went to a therapist and I felt good afterwards. In fact, I've been to this therapist several times, and I highly recommend every one of you in here make an appointment with a therapist, whether you think you need it or not, and just talk or listen. But have something in play for you and know that I'm going to support that decision if you do that. Now that's leadership. Like that made a profound impact, hearing that for everybody in that room, because the chief himself said, I did it, and I recommend you do it too.
That's about walking the talk right there. And it's funny how I know we said we've never met in person or haven't crossed paths yet, but a lot of things we're talking about, a lot of things that I've found is what's being brought up, like just in my own one-on-one surveys with people that hear me speak, or just me listening to other people. It's like, sometimes you have to see that CEO, that police chief, that sheriff, the director, the warden, whatever you want to call the title of the person that runs your agency, you have to see them participating in some of these programs in order to understand how important it is.
They are. San Antonio just released a survey that they did when they asked members of the department if they felt safe asking for help. And the top two responses were, number one, fear of losing their job, and number two, don't trust leadership. And you've got to change that. I mean, this police culture of suck it up, rub some sand in it, whatever you want to do, like, those days have got to be over. Like, this job is taking way too many lives of friends and families and mothers and fathers. It's horrible. When you look at the numbers, if you look at First Help and you look at the numbers each day, it seems like they just continue to rise, the suicide count. And it's like, why won't you ask for help? But your agency has to do more than check the box. They have to truly support the officer. And if you feel supported, you will ask for the help. And to me, I'm going to be honest with you, it is that simple. It's that simple. They've got to feel supported and know that, hey, you're going to invest in me, and I'm going to have to take some time and get myself right. But when I come back, you're going to be there for me. And I think if you can show that and build that relationship, not only one, will you save face with a lot of rank and file, but two, you're going to have people lined up to work there as well.
Oh yeah. I was talking, who did I hear? What's Marsha, I don't know her last name, but she's a police chief out of Oregon. And I heard her speak last week at the FBI National Academy. And that's something she talked about, was that they're building more mental wellness programs and officer wellness programs for their staff. And she says she's at 100% staffing in Oregon. So, I mean, you're right. But she walks the talk, and she goes out there. She's promoting it. She's She's the cheerleader of the program. I remember a time when I was a lieutenant myself, and I had a small unit, probably about 10 guys, and it was funny. They made an accomplishment, and they were like, and I was like, okay, cool, man, you guys did great. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I was like, yeah, the warden, he really sends his regards. I was like, okay. They was like, but we're not satisfied yet. I was like, wait, what? They was like, well, we know you appreciate us, but we want to hear it and see it from him to actually know it's getting all the way up there. Mind you, they already knew what to expect out of me, but I was a first line supervisor. They actually wanted to hear from the CEO that, hey, they're getting that, they believe it just as much, because then they felt they just wanted him to come down and say thank you. They didn't want any kind of special awards. They just wanted him to walk physically down there to the area and say, hey guys, you did a good job.
Yeah, I mean, that's really, isn't that all humans? They want to feel valued and validated. I mean, that's no different in law enforcement. Yes, we don't need the certificate of appreciation on the wall. I mean, you can keep that, but come down and look us in the eye and say, hey, good job. That was a tough assignment, or that was a good catch, or that was a good find. It got noticed up here and I heard about it. Good job. I wanted to come down here personally and thank you for all the time and the long hours that it took for you to wrap this up. I mean, that goes a long way. But if you just hear it from your supervisors all the time, it's like, well, yeah, of course they're going to say that. That's what they're going to do. To fire us up and go out there and do it again, day in and day out. But it's a little different when you have somebody with a star come down and say, hey, I heard about it all the way up in my office, and I just want to take the time to say good job. Especially if you're a dog watch officer, and you're showing up at a roll call at 10:30 at night. We never would see a chief at a dog watch roll call. That would have been like a miracle sighting if we saw a chief come in.
That's true though.
It just never happened. But why not? Why doesn't it happen is my question. You can't sacrifice a little bit of, instead of going to bed at 10, maybe go to bed at 11 or 12, and come in and let those officers know, hey, appreciate you being out there every night. I know that this isn't the most desirable shift and you probably don't sleep a whole lot because you got family things to do during the day, but I just want to come in and say, I appreciate what y'all do. That goes a long way.
You're right. It does. It definitely does shift how they think. And it's like, oh man, if you're up at 12 or you're up at 10 or whatever the overnight shift is, you're right. It makes a difference. Now, as we're getting close to the end, I do want to highlight one major thing that I've seen on your profile as well. And I wanted to make sure I touched on it. Now, you wrote a book called, let's see, it's called, did you write it on here? It is called,
I hope so. Mental Health and De-escalation.
Yes, again. Yeah. So tell us about the premise of that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I gotta give my co-author Nick Ruggiero heads. Thank you for that one. He called me back in 2021 and said, "Hey man, you want to co-author a book with me?" And I'm like, "Oh man, I'm not like." He's written several books and he's done very well. Several of them, if not all of them, have gone #1 every time he writes one. And I'm like, dude, are you sure you want me to like I barely made it, out of college English. Like, he goes, yeah, man, let's do one on homicide. I'm like, freaking homicide. Like I've worked homicides, but I was never like a detective. And like, you want to do one maybe on like mental health? He's like, oh damn, I forgot. I'm talking to crisis cop. Yeah, man, let's do mental health. And I'm like, all right. So it just so happened both of us, and I didn't know it, got COVID at the same time. So now I'm like, oh, wow. Crap, I got nothing to do but write. So I'm going to sit down and I'm going to start writing. The deal was you write 50, 60 pages. I write 50, 60. We'll see if we can't put together, a short guide for law enforcement officers and professionals about mental health and de-escalation. So I finished mine. He finished his. I said, all right, let's switch. And we didn't discuss what each other was going to write. So he wrote it from a sergeant standpoint. And I wrote mine from, boots on the ground out there and as an instructor in teaching mental health. So really my chapters that I did was I outlined a lot of the courses that we teach and then how to implement those, and just talked about some of the federal laws that go in place with mental health, like EMTALA, and how that works in the officer's favor. And just, so we wrote about two totally different things, which was perfect. It worked out perfect. But then he did me a solid. And when I saw the finished product, he only put like 30 of his pages in and gave me 70 or 80 because I ended up writing a little extra. So, he gave me top billing on the front cover. He put my picture and some excerpts on the back. He gave me the majority of the book. And then it went number one on Amazon, which I couldn't believe. I'm like, who is buying this book? Like, but then people would reach out. It was teachers, hospital staffs, nurses, single moms were reaching out saying, hey, I'm glad you wrote this. I understand a little bit better about bipolar and how to interact and have conversation with my daughter now. I understand the importance of active listening and how to communicate better and the difference between listening and hearing. And, we were getting all this feedback and I'm like, wow. And just recently we just we just hit over 130 different agencies now that have purchased this book and put it into their library. And several universities have made this required reading in their law enforcement and criminal justice programs. So it was something I just said, I'll try it. I've never done anything like this. And it was such a huge success and still is doing well today. So I wrote it really for an officer to throw in their bag and be able to pull out and read. It's an easy read. I made the font big, double spaced it. Like I know, because I know what I'm going to read. But it was a good tool, especially for smaller agencies that can't afford to send an officer to a 40-hour CIT school. This book would equip you to at least have a decent foundation on how to recognize a mental health crisis and then how to communicate and de-escalate. So that's really what it was for. It was for, that patrol officer that maybe doesn't have access to a training budget and get to go to those types of trainings. I tried to bring it to you in your patrol car.
Yeah. And if you're looking for something quick, obviously that's sometimes the best way to do it, because even if you have money in your budget, sometimes you don't get a chance to go to a class for 6 months, a year, or whatever. Getting a book like yours, this Mental Health and De-escalation, I mean, they have a quick hands-on access to that book. And I mean, I'm looking at it right now on Amazon because I research things quickly. I'm sorry, guys, it's the law enforcement side of me. If you got it just paperback right now, you can get it for $16.99, hardcover $20, audiobook for $6. So you have a quick resource if you are either in that crisis intervention type training, you're looking forward, like you're looking to get into that, or you just want to have a snapshot of what law enforcement is dealing with when it comes to those two categories.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these skills, and they're diminishing skills. If you don't truly practice them, you'll go right back to the way that you used to communicate, which is usually you're going to yell and try to scream over over the top of somebody. And you're going to have a difficult time really communicating and making that connection because you're focused on the person. I'm sorry, you're focused on the problem and not the person. And the problem is usually emotionally charged. What this book will show you and what you'll learn is that if you focus on the person and not the problem, you'll make a connection and not be so worried about the correction of the issue that's going on. So it really is about learning how to be empathetic in somebody's situation and being able to make that connection and converse.
Perfect. All right. So I had two things I want to touch on before we go. I know I said I know we talked about the book. I did want to hear about that, which I'm very happy we got able to touch on because I didn't know it was that in depth, and I didn't know it has so much ties to the whole crisis intervention and that type of training. How has all of this training you've gone through, 28 years of San Antonio PD, being a CIT instructor, being an HBO documentary, writing a book, working for this new company as a deputy director, how's all this impacted your family life?
It made me a better person. It made me a better husband, a better father, a better friend. It taught me to get outside of myself and truly connect with other people. For probably my first 15 years on the police department, I was a hypocrite. My line, like most officers say, is, "Hey, sorry, I'm just doing my job." That's one of the crappiest things you could really say to somebody. If you think about it, that means I really don't care about what you're going through because I'm just doing my job. That's what you're essentially saying. And when I realized that people really don't care, how much how many degrees you got, they just want to know how much you care. And you do that by being empathetic. And that class in 2003, it changed my life. I went head over heels. I dove in the deep end. As soon as Monday rolled around after the training was over, I joined our National Alliance on Mental Illness organization, our chapter here in San Antonio. Within 2 years, I was a board of director and I was advocating, and I was truly making an impact and connecting with our community members here and wanting that voice that had been silenced for so long to be heard and to be felt. And I really just felt like it was, I don't know, my duty to speak up, on behalf of the community that suffers with mental health issues. And then what I learned for myself is it taught me more how to care for people, including my own family. So you asked what it did for me. That's what it did. It made me a better human being.
And that's what it boils down to, really, is how's it going to make us better as a person, as a whole person? I always say whole person. I don't even know if that's the right term to use, but I love using it. But how's that going to make us better at that level? Because without that foundation that's solid mentally, like in our own minds, it's hard for us to go protect the community. It's hard for us to protect our family. It's hard to protect the agency, whatever you're looking at. But when you take all of that, like you said, I mean, prior to that 2003 training, you just had your own mindset, which wasn't uncommon, which to this day is still not uncommon. But sometimes it takes that one training that changes people. And I think some of the training that's coming out nowadays on like self-awareness or mental health or anything, I think that training is going to get to people a lot sooner as long as they're willing to engage. But the cool thing about it, there's a lot of resources. It's just a matter of people getting the programs promoted to them, like marketed to them. So I think we are getting a little bit better at that as an industry. I think it takes time, but I do think that the process is there for people to grow. So for our listeners, and for anybody that wants to share this to anybody that they believe that's going to be beneficial to, where can they find you?
Well, my social media, I'm on LinkedIn, so just search Ernest Stevens. That should show up. I don't know what else you want to tag on there. Police officer, that might show up. And then I'm on Twitter, Twitter at eStevens0845 on Twitter. I'm pretty active there. And, but I mean, that's really my only social media. I do have a erneststevens.com website. That's where the book is located. If you want to get a copy of that, I'd be happy to send you out one. And then you can send some questions through there if you want to connect. But yeah, LinkedIn or Twitter is probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Yeah, I know. I love me some LinkedIn, but Twitter, I have not figured out. And it's sad because I should know better given some of the stuff I do with technology. But
I found you tonight. I was like, damn, 24 followers. You better get busy, my man.
And it's sad because my LinkedIn has over 17,000.
Oh, I know.
It's like, that's why I said I don't know. And I know it's a me thing, not thinking it through. So when you said Twitter, I was just talking to Chief Ramirez out of Dallas PD. We were talking about Twitter, and I was
he's all over it.
He is, and that's what he told me. He was like, Michael, he's like, when our podcast comes out, can you tag me on Twitter? I said I could try. I said I'm sure I could figure it out, but I don't have a extremely big presence there. But I have been thinking about it because I know a lot of what we do on law enforcement is still popular even on Twitter, which is interesting. But it's just how. It's just, one of the mediums that are still popular for what we do.
Yeah, I think it's now known as what, X?
Yeah, I saw that on my app. I was like, what is this X on my, literally, I looked on my phone and I was like, what happened to my Twitter app icon? And I said, X. I said, is this Twitter? I pulled it up. I said, I don't know what's going on anymore. So you're right. I just thought it was just last week or the week before, whatever.
Yeah, I just saw it. So yeah, it popped up. But no, I appreciate it. You getting my information out there. I'd love to connect to your listeners if they have any questions or just want to connect. And you can still watch the HBO documentary. It's still streaming on HBO Max. Just do a search for Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops. Reach out to me. Let me know what you think. If you have any comments, I'd love to hear it. I love talking about it. So again, Michael, you've been a fantastic host, man, having me on and using your platform to really elevate officer wellness and mental health. I can't thank you enough.
Absolutely. No problem. And are there any final words that you want to give the audience?
No, I think we covered a lot. I want to, stress the importance of your own self-care for those that are listening. I kind of was a little late in the game and taking care of my own. But in doing so now, I really, understand the importance of it and how not only will you, especially in retirement, right? Not only do I just want to live a good life, I want to thrive. And this allows me the opportunity to thrive is when you're taking good care of yourself. So make sure you're doing the same for yourself. Yeah,
those are amazing final words, Ernie. I tell you, because I'm with you in the same boat. it didn't take me 15 years, but it did take me some time to realize, like, hey, self-care of myself is more important than anything else. And the only reason is because without that, then how are you going to perform? So yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to be on my episode and sharing a wealth of wisdom with the listeners. I'm sure every single person that downloads and listens to this, they're going to gain at least one nugget that they could take back with their lives and their department or whoever, even if it's somebody like a loved one that hears it. These are episodes that connect on all levels. So I do appreciate your time, Ernie. And for all those listening, I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your busy days and listening to this episode on the LEO First podcast. And I hope to see you guys on the next episode. Y'all have a great day.
You've been listening to the LEO First podcast. Michael has been in law enforcement since 2005. He's worked for 3 law enforcement agencies in 3 different states. He's a professional speaker who travels the country teaching about leadership development and self-awareness. And he's the author of a book called Greatness Beyond the Badge: The 3 Key Principles for Self-Awareness. It's Michael's passion to bring law enforcement members' stories to the front, so you get the real and raw take. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Michael on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Michael Laidler, on Twitter at Michael A. Laidler, on Facebook at Michael Laidler Leadership. Send an email to michael@michaelalaidler.com and hit the website at michaelalaidler.com. See you next time on the LEO First podcast. Like that, I'm going to be leaving a note. My vehicle is driving in the remote.